happening now, a major escalation in President Trump's trade war with Mexico and Canada.
America just lost the EV war, and Canada fired the first shot. Tesla shut down its US factories and moved north, signing a multi-billion-dollar deal with Ottawa. While American towns went dark, bulldozers broke ground near Windsor. This wasn't a pivot. It was a power shift. Why did Tesla switch sides? What did Canada give up to win? And is this the start of a new economic Cold War? Because by the time this video ends, you'll understand what the US just gave away. Tesla shuts down America. Tesla didn't just close its doors. It shut down the future of US manufacturing. The announcement came without warning. A single press release, dropped just after markets closed, confirmed what workers at Giga Texas and Fremont had feared for weeks. Tesla was halting all US vehicle manufacturing operations until further notice. Overnight, what had been America's crown jewel of electric innovation became a ghost town. Inside Fremont, stunned workers were told to leave as machines halted mid-cycle. At Giga Texas, security handed out severance packets. Tesla called it a strategic realignment, but gave no timeline, no town hall, and no clear explanation. For communities built around these plants, the shutdown wasn't just economic, it was personal. In Austin, a 28-year-old line worker named Micah, who had just bought his first home, said, "It's like your best friend just ghosted you." In Fremont, third-generation machinists who had transitioned from old GM jobs into EV manufacturing said this felt worse than the 2008 collapse. "Back then, we knew who was responsible," one retiree muttered. Now, it's just silence. Tesla's move wasn't just unexpected, it was devastating. It shattered the illusion that American tech jobs were immune to global pressures. The company that once symbolized the resurgence of US manufacturing had now become its executioner. Meanwhile, just across the border, a very different kind of announcement was setting off fireworks in Ottawa. The Canadian power play? The same week Tesla blindsided America, it signed a multi-billion-dollar pact with Canada. As American workers reeled, Canadian officials celebrated behind closed doors. Just 2 days after Tesla's US factory closures were confirmed, the company signed a sweeping agreement with Canadian officials to establish a massive EV supply corridor, stretching from southern Ontario to Quebec. The ink was still drying when Canadian Finance Minister Sophie Lavoie described it as the biggest mobility investment in our country's history. The deal was valued at more than $4 billion in direct commitments, but insiders say the total economic impact could exceed $12 billion. Tesla secured access to rare earth minerals, government-backed land grants, and fast-tracked environmental approvals. Even more critical, a locked-in agreement with LG and Northvolt to co-develop battery modules within Canadian borders. In return, Canada gained something far more valuable than cash. It secured industrial relevance in a century-defining sector. "We're not just building batteries," one cabinet advisor said. "We're building sovereignty." Ontario Premier Malik Rahimi posted a now viral photo of himself shaking hands with a senior Tesla executive outside a future Gigafactory site near Windsor. In the background, bulldozers already clearing the land. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. While the US was laying off workers, Canada was breaking ground. For those workers, shock turned into outrage, and their voices were about to break through the silence. If this shocked you, hit like and drop a comment. Was Tesla right? Or did they abandon America? Your voice matters, and we're watching every response carefully. The abandoned workers. Fremont called it temporary. Austin called it a reset. But the workers? They knew what it really meant. At first, the messaging was vague. Tesla's internal HR communications used neutral language, strategic alignment, pause in domestic production, reassessment of operational priorities. But the reality was harsher. Jenna Ruiz, a 42-year-old logistics tech at Giga Texas, said her entire team was disbanded within hours. "We weren't even told by our manager," she said. "We got an email that our badges wouldn't scan by Friday." In Fremont, workers reported receiving system-generated severance emails before speaking to a single human. Union leaders, who had spent the past 2 years pushing for representation at Tesla, erupted. The closure was seen not just as economic betrayal, but as a deliberate blow against organizing efforts. "They didn't just leave," said union rep Carlos Mendoza. "They vanished the minute we gained traction." The layoffs also echoed the wounds of the NAFTA years, when automakers fled to Mexico, gutting American industrial towns. But this felt different. Back then, it was about cheap labor, said a former GM assembler now working at a coffee shop. This time, it's about power, and Canada has it. Even among Tesla's most loyal fans, the narrative began to shift. The same people who once bragged about being part of the future now questioned if that future had a passport. Back in DC, the fuse had been lit, and every faction was ready to strike. The political fuse ignites. It wasn't just Democrats or Republicans. It was everyone. Within 48 hours of Tesla's shutdown, political fury ignited. Republican governors in Texas and Florida called the move economic treason, while Democratic senators from Michigan and California demanded immediate hearings. Donald Trump called Tesla a disgrace and accused Elon Musk of selling out. President Biden, under pressure from unions and climate groups, held an emergency meeting. White House officials said they received no advance notice of Tesla's decision to shut U.S. plants. What emerged next was something few expected: bipartisan momentum for a new legislative campaign. Tentatively titled the Domestic Manufacturing Protection Act, the bill proposed punishing companies that shut down U.S. factories while receiving federal contracts or subsidies. "If you want American money," said Senator Lisa Bell of Ohio, "you better keep American jobs." Outside the Capitol, a grassroots surge began taking shape. Workers, activists, and even Tesla customers started organizing under a new banner: Buy American or Get Out. Social media posts went viral showing people canceling Cybertruck pre-orders and staging symbolic protests at empty Tesla showrooms. Tesla had made a business decision, but Washington saw something else: a cultural betrayal, one that could shift voter sentiment in battleground states already battered by inflation and automation. What started as policy backlash was about to explode onto the global stage, with economic weapons drawn. Canada strikes back. You don't pull jobs out of Canada and expect silence. Tesla just found that out the hard way. The morning after Tesla's deal with Canada made headlines, Ottawa fired its first warning shot. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's administration launched a formal review into the subsidies Tesla had received over the past 3 years, both federally and provincially. The probe, spearheaded by the Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, aimed to determine whether Tesla had violated any conditions tied to local hiring, emissions reporting, or labor standards. To many Canadians, the message was clear: if Tesla thought it could muscle its way across borders without accountability, it had misread the moment. "We're not just a convenience zone for multinationals," said Environment Minister Isabelle Tremblay. "We're a sovereign economy, and we won't be bullied." More than pride was at stake. The Canadian government made it known that Tesla's new facilities would only move forward if the company met stricter climate benchmarks and agreed to third-party labor audits. These weren't symbolic gestures. The new requirements were a direct response to growing public criticism about Tesla's anti-union history and opaque labor practices. What began as a celebration of Tesla's northern pivot was quickly becoming a test of Canada's industrial backbone. Could it protect its values while hosting the most powerful automaker in the world? What followed next turned boardrooms into battlegrounds and buyers into collateral. The tariff crossfire. Trump raised tariffs to 35%. Canada responded with a list of its own. As expected, the White House didn't take kindly to Tesla's offshore pivot, especially one that involved a close U.S. ally. Within 72 hours, President Trump signed an executive order raising tariffs on select Canadian EV components from 25% to 35%. "They want to take our jobs and sell us their cars," he said during a rally in Michigan. "Not on my watch." But Ottawa didn't blink. Instead, Canada published a retaliatory tariff list targeting U.S.-made auto parts, aluminum, and electronic chips critical to EV assembly. By week's end, both governments had effectively created a tariff wall through which no electric vehicle could pass without becoming dramatically more expensive. The auto industry was thrown into chaos. U.S. suppliers dependent on Canadian plants began bleeding revenue. Canadian buyers saw EV prices climb by as much as $10,000 per vehicle. Tesla's own pricing for the Model Y rose by 14% in Vancouver overnight, pushing the base model beyond reach for many middle-class families. And it wasn't just Tesla. Ford, General Motors, and even Honda and Toyota found themselves caught in the crossfire. Executives scrambled to adjust their sourcing plans and called for emergency trade consultations. "This isn't policy," one auto lobbyist said. "It's a wrecking ball." And while tensions soared, few remembered that buried deep in North America's trade pact was a clause powerful enough to end it all. Buried beneath decades of trade agreements was a legal trigger, and Canada was ready to pull it. The USMCA showdown. Buried in North America's trade pact was one clause no one expected to use. Until now. Behind closed doors, Canadian trade lawyers were preparing a counterattack. It came not through speeches or headlines, but through a formal invocation of Chapter 31 of the USMCA, the trade agreement that replaced NAFTA. This clause allowed for a full dispute resolution mechanism in cases of unfair or discriminatory practices between signatories. Canada's argument was bold. Tesla's deal and the retaliatory tariffs constituted a breach of the rules of origin framework that ensures fair automotive content from all three countries. According to Ottawa, Tesla's plan to route U.S. parts through Canada while avoiding assembly obligations undermined the spirit of trilateral cooperation. The legal challenge, filed in early August, triggered a 90-day clock. If unresolved, it could bring about formal arbitration and potentially dismantle some of the trade protections that had shielded the auto sector for decades. Suddenly, every major automaker operating in North America faced legal uncertainty. Would their vehicle exports qualify for zero tariffs under USMCA? Could Tesla's business model survive a ruling that forced more local labor? And what precedent would it set for other tech giants looking to offshore production without oversight? The stakes were enormous, but as the legal filings piled up and diplomats scrambled to defuse the bomb, one player remained entirely silent. In the growing storm, the loudest silence came from the very company at the center of it all. Tesla goes silent. When the storm hit, Musk didn't tweet. Tesla didn't comment. The silence was deafening. For a company known for bombastic announcements, Tesla's quiet during the crisis was unprecedented. Elon Musk, who once live-streamed product reveals and trash-talked regulators on social media, said absolutely nothing about the factory closures, the Canadian deal, or the trade war spiraling in their wake. Shareholders were left in the dark. Tesla's investor relations page remained unchanged for over 2 weeks. No earnings call was scheduled, no interviews were granted. Internally, employees at Tesla's California offices reported receiving no guidance or updates. "It's like we don't even exist anymore," one senior designer said. Wall Street began to fracture. Some analysts applauded the company's strategic pivot, arguing that Canadian production and access to rare earth minerals gave Tesla a long-term edge. Others called it a PR catastrophe that could trigger regulatory scrutiny and damage the brand's image among U.S. consumers. Meanwhile, loyal customers felt abandoned. Tesla forums and Reddit threads filled with frustration and confusion. Some posted cancellation receipts for pending orders. Others expressed concern over rising service wait times and unavailable parts. A once devoted user base began to splinter, but Tesla didn't flinch. Its silence created a vacuum that politicians and pundits were eager to fill with anger, confusion, and speculation. The company, once synonymous with the American dream of innovation, now felt like a corporate ghost ship drifting in contested waters. North of the border, blueprints turned to breakthroughs, and Tesla wasn't the only name in the game anymore. Canada's Industrial Revolution. This wasn't just a deal, it was a signal the next auto empire would be Canadian. From the factories of Windsor to the clean energy labs in Trois-Rivières, Canada wasted no time turning Tesla's arrival into a blueprint for national reinvention. What began as a billion-dollar deal soon became a full-scale industrial transformation. Within weeks, new partnerships were announced between Tesla and major battery manufacturers like LG Energy Solution and Panasonic North America, paving the way for a vertically integrated EV supply chain built entirely on Canadian soil. Ontario's Ministry of Economic Development unveiled plans to create a high-speed transportation corridor connecting Windsor, London, Toronto, and Montreal, enabling same-day delivery of EV components across the region. Quebec's provincial government offered tax incentives for green R&D facilities, while Vancouver tech startups began hiring engineers laid off from Tesla's California offices. International auto firms noticed. Volkswagen, Hyundai, and BYD reportedly sent delegates to observe the rollout. Canada is no longer a branch market, one industry strategist said. It's a launchpad. The message was clear. Canada wasn't just taking jobs, it was taking leadership. Canadian officials used every press conference to broadcast the same mantra: stability, transparency, and strategic clarity. And with global supply chains increasingly wary of U.S. trade unpredictability, Canada's steady hand offered a new kind of advantage. For thousands of workers in small-town America, the ripple became a tidal wave. Suppliers left behind. In Ohio, a parts plant laid off 160 workers. In Michigan, another just shut its doors. The closures started quietly. One Tier 2 supplier here, another logistics hub there. But by the end of the month, a clear pattern emerged. The U.S. EV supply chain was cracking. Entire towns built around legacy auto contracts were left scrambling. In Sandusky, Ohio, a parts manufacturer that once produced chassis components for Tesla furloughed its entire second shift. Company executives blamed the sudden drop in volume from Fremont and Giga Texas, neither of which had resumed domestic operations. In Pontiac, Michigan, a firm that fabricated interior trim for the Model Y filed for bankruptcy, citing a total loss of projected orders through the next fiscal year. These businesses weren't diversified. Many relied on Tesla for over 70% of their annual revenue, and while Tesla was pivoting to Canadian sources, their US counterparts had no backup plan. As one supply chain analyst put it, this was a one-client economy, and that client just moved out. Local governments had little power to intervene. State economic development boards issued emergency grants, but with limited budgets and no guarantees of federal support, the assistance was mostly symbolic. Community leaders, once proud to host cutting-edge tech suppliers, now faced unemployment spikes and tax revenue shortfalls. Meanwhile, Wall Street was doing its own calculus, and the math didn't favor loyalty. Wall Street's cold calculation: investors didn't punish Tesla, they rewarded it. On Wall Street, the tone was different. While politicians, workers, and communities mourned the fallout, investors applauded Tesla's streamlined cost structure and optimized regulatory exposure. In the span of 4 trading days, Tesla's stock price jumped 11%. Investment banks released updated price targets, citing advantages in mineral access, labor cost predictability, and lower geopolitical risk north of the border. One firm wrote, "Tesla has once again proved its ability to outmaneuver regulation and reshape supply chains in real time." Legacy automakers weren't as fortunate. General Motors and Ford experienced slight declines as analysts flagged their reliance on US overhead and warned they might struggle to pivot quickly if others followed Tesla's lead in shifting manufacturing abroad. Meanwhile, Canadian stock indexes ticked upward, especially in sectors tied to energy, infrastructure, and mining. Companies involved in lithium refining, battery recycling, and even construction saw short-term gains as capital flooded toward the north. Canada's economic press dubbed it the EV boom, and investors began treating it like a movement. On dealership floors and order screens, the fallout became personal. The price of abandonment: your next Tesla will cost more, and it may not be built here at all. When Tesla started routing deliveries from its new Canadian facilities, buyers noticed something strange. The price tags were higher, sometimes by as much as $7,000. Transportation fees, customs costs, and higher border tariffs all contributed to the increase. But that wasn't the only change. US-based consumers discovered that several Canadian-assembled Teslas no longer qualified for full federal tax incentives under the Inflation Reduction Act. The legislation had required domestic final assembly, which Tesla was now circumventing. That meant up to $7,500 in savings vanished for thousands of buyers. Social media exploded with anger. Prospective customers posted screenshots of revised invoices and cancellation confirmations. Hashtags like "is on no more Tesla" and "is made in USA only" began trending. Dealership alternatives, particularly EVs from Ford and Hyundai, saw a spike in showroom interest, even among former Tesla loyalists. At Tesla showrooms in New Jersey and Arizona, employees reported a sharp decline in walk-in traffic. Customer service lines were flooded with refund requests and complaints. Some owners even accused the company of deception, claiming they had placed orders expecting US production and pricing. And while Tesla remained officially silent, the market spoke. The brand's approval rating slipped 5 points in a consumer trust index conducted in early August. It wasn't just a pricing issue, it was a perception shift. Far from finished, lawmakers began sharpening their knives for a policy reckoning. Congress pushes back. From swing states to Senate hearings, the message was clear: bring those factories home. By late August, the political backlash had become legislative. In Capitol Hill offices filled with Rust Belt maps and re-election spreadsheets, lawmakers began drafting bills aimed squarely at Tesla's offshoring strategy. Senator Amelia Griggs of Pennsylvania introduced the Domestic Retention Act, a sweeping proposal that would slash tax breaks for any automaker closing U.S. production facilities while expanding overseas. Her co-sponsor, Senator Craig Lohman of Ohio, called it the industrial equivalent of a betrayal clause. On the House side, a bipartisan coalition emerged to rework electric vehicle incentives. New language proposed that only vehicles assembled by unionized labor within the U.S. mainland would qualify for full tax credits. That meant Tesla, still non-union and increasingly foreign-produced, could lose most of its competitive pricing advantage on paper. Meanwhile, campaign rhetoric across the country hardened. In Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona, Senate candidates ran ads accusing Tesla of selling out America. One governor running for re-election in Michigan stood in front of a shuttered supplier plant and declared, "We built them, they left us. Now we fight back." Lobbyists pushed hard to dilute the legislation, claiming it would stifle innovation and alienate global investors. But labor leaders countered with their own pressure campaigns, framing the moment as a line in the sand. "This isn't just about jobs," said United Auto Workers President Linda Morales. "It's about what kind of country we want to be." While Capitol Hill debated, Canada was sealing deals faster than America could draft the bills. Canada doubles down. Instead of waiting, Canada accelerated, offering more incentives than ever before. While Washington scrambled to react, Ottawa moved forward. The Canadian federal government, along with Quebec and Ontario, unveiled a second wave of incentive packages aimed at attracting more than just Tesla. Their targets? European and Asian giants. Volkswagen was offered a $200 million grant to expand its Ontario battery campus. Hyundai received conditional approval for a factory just outside Montreal, contingent on clean energy sourcing. Even China's BYD, long seen as unlikely to enter North America, was in early-stage discussions with Canadian trade officials about a research facility in British Columbia. Unlike the US, which was tightening its definitions of domestic production, Canada positioned itself as neutral ground in the global EV arms race. "We don't care where your headquarters are," said Minister of Innovation Pierre Gauthier. "If you build here, employ here, and stay here, we'll partner with you." The strategy worked. Within 30 days, foreign direct investment in Canada's automotive sector grew by 26%. Trade envoys from the European Union arrived in Ottawa to negotiate battery material agreements. Japan sent a delegation of EV engineers to tour Windsor's new corridor. Canada wasn't just doubling down, it was reshaping its identity, from natural resource exporter to clean tech manufacturing power, all without the political volatility that now defined its southern neighbor. Suddenly, the world's largest automakers began asking a new question. Why stay in the United States at all? The global domino effect. It started with one company, but now everyone's looking to move. Tesla's shift triggered more than regional job losses. It fractured a decades-old assumption that US soil was sacred ground for industrial scale. Global automakers, watching the unfolding crisis, began exploring alternate paths. Volkswagen commissioned a feasibility study on moving its next North American expansion to Canada instead of Tennessee. Hyundai's CEO publicly praised Canada's predictable energy pricing and trade reliability. BYD's interest, once dismissed as speculative, gained credibility as Canada opened its markets without preconditions. Europe, too, re-evaluated its US trade alignment. Several EU economic ministers privately expressed concern over the increasing politicization of American industrial policy. One German official was quoted saying, "What happens to Tesla today could happen to us tomorrow." Countries long considered allies were now cautiously distancing themselves. Even Mexico began talking with Canadian officials about joining the Northern Corridor concept to create a new supply route that avoided US infrastructure altogether. Fear of US political unpredictability, not just under Trump, but under any future administration, was driving a broader realignment, and Tesla, whether by brilliance or blunder, had become the symbol of that shift. Back on American soil, the economic gut punch was landing in full force. If this story opened your eyes, subscribe now. We uncover what others won't say, and the next shift might hit even closer to home. Don't miss what comes next. The end of US auto dominance ? This wasn't just a deal, it was a warning shot, and America may have missed it. By the time autumn arrived, the consequences had crystallized. Investor confidence in US industrial policy, once considered a cornerstone of global manufacturing, began to waver. A JP Morgan report downgraded the US auto sector outlook, citing systemic vulnerability to political interference and supply chain rigidity. In the auto heartland, an identity crisis brewed. What did it mean to be a manufacturing power if the crown jewel of electric vehicles had abandoned your factories? Former Tesla engineers in Texas spoke of betrayal. Suppliers in Indiana described themselves as collateral damage. Local officials in California and Michigan found themselves defending against accusations of policy complacency. And through it all, American consumers were left in the middle. They had built Tesla's empire with pre-orders, tweets, and wait lists stretching back over a decade. Now, they watched the company move north without a word. One former Tesla owner in Phoenix put it bluntly, "I sold my car. Not because it broke down, but because I did." This wasn't just about economics. It was about narrative. For generations, the American auto industry had represented something bigger than business. It was a symbol of national pride, working-class power, and technological edge. But now, for the first time in over 100 years, that symbol felt unstable. So the question now isn't where Tesla builds. It's who America builds for anymore. This wasn't just a corporate pivot. It was a warning. The ground is shifting, and most people won't see it coming until it's too late. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more unfiltered analysis. Because the next move? It could be even bigger and closer to home.